Jake Morrison stepped off the transport shuttle and into the largest space station he had ever seen. Nexus Prime stretched out in all directions, its corridors wide enough for 3 ships to fly through side by side. The ceiling disappeared into darkness above him, and strange lights flickered in patterns he could not understand. Hundreds of alien beings moved through the station, talking in languages that sounded like music, grinding metal, or bubbling water. Jake pulled his small travel bag closer to his chest and tried not to stare. At 24 years old, he was the youngest member of Earth's trade delegation, and this was his first time off his home planet. Everything here was bigger, stranger, and more colorful than anything he had imagined. A group of tall, green-skinned aliens walked past him. They stood at least 8 feet tall, with thick scales covering their bodies and sharp teeth visible when they spoke. One of them looked down at Jake and made a sound that might have been laughter. The alien said something to his friends in their own language, and they all turned to look at Jake. Their yellow eyes studied him from head to toe, and then they walked away, still making those laughing sounds. Jake felt his face turn red. He knew he was not impressive to look at. Standing just 5 feet and 6 inches tall, with brown hair and a thin build, he looked like a child next to these massive aliens. His Earth-made clothes seemed plain and cheap compared to the bright, flowing garments the other species wore. He walked through the station, following the signs that pointed toward the diplomatic quarter. More aliens stopped to stare at him as he passed. A group of crystal-like beings that sparkled in the light whispered to each other and pointed at him. Their voices sounded like wind chimes, but Jake could tell they were not saying nice things. The insect-like creatures were the worst. They stood on 4 legs with 2 arms that ended in sharp claws. Their heads looked like those of giant beetles with large black eyes that seemed to see everything. When Jake walked past them, they made clicking sounds with their mouths that sounded too much like laughter for his comfort. Jake finally reached the diplomatic office, where a massive alien sat behind a desk that could have served as a dining table for 6 humans. The alien was one of the green-scaled ones, but even bigger than the others Jake had seen. His name tag read Administrator Vextal. In several different languages, Vextal looked up from his work and stared at Jake for a long moment. Then he made that same laughing sound the others had made. "You are the human diplomat?" he asked in accented but clear English. "Yes, sir," Jake replied, trying to keep his voice steady. Jake Morrison, representing Earth in the new trade negotiations. Vextal leaned back in his chair, which creaked under his weight. "I was expecting someone more substantial. Are you certain you are old enough to be away from your parents?" Heat rose in Jake's cheeks again, but he forced himself to stay calm. "I may be young, but I have been trained for this job. I have studied galactic trade law for 3 years and speak 4 alien languages." "How impressive," Vextal said in a tone that made it clear he was not impressed at all. "Well, little human, I suppose we must find you somewhere to stay. Unfortunately, all of our standard diplomatic quarters are occupied. You will have to make do with something smaller." Jake nodded. "That will be fine, sir." Vextal pressed a button on his desk and a smaller alien appeared. This one looked like a walking stick with eyes, thin and brown with long arms and legs. "Take the human to quarters 1247C, Vextal ordered. "The small ones, near the waist." "Processing center." The stick-like alien nodded and motioned for Jake to follow. As they walked through the station, Jake noticed that his guide kept looking back at him with what might have been pity. The quarters were indeed small. Jake had to duck to get through the doorway, and once inside, he could touch both walls by stretching out his arms. The bed was too short for him, and the ceiling was so low he had to stoop. The room smelled like chemicals from the nearby waste processing plant. "Not exactly the presidential suite," a voice said behind him. Jake turned to see a human woman standing in the hallway. She was in her 40s, with gray streaks in her dark hair and the confident look of someone who had been in space for many years. She wore practical clothes and carried herself like she knew how to handle trouble. "I'm Lisa Carter," she said, extending her hand. "I run a trading company out of Earth. Been working this station for about 5 years now." Jake shook her hand. Grateful to meet another human, Jake Morrison. I'm here for the trade negotiations. Lisa looked around his tiny room and shook her head. They really stuck it to you, didn't they? Let me guess, Vextol assigned you these quarters personally. How? Did you know? Because he's done this to every human who's come here. The aliens on this station think we're weak, pathetic little creatures who don't deserve respect. They judge everything by size and strength, and since most of us humans are smaller than them, they treat us like children or pets. Jake sat down on the tiny bed which creaked under even his light weight. Is it always like this? Lisa leaned against the doorframe. Usually yes, but here's some advice, kid. Don't let them see that it bothers you. The moment they smell fear or shame, they'll make your life even worse. Keep your head up, do your job, and prove them wrong with results. Has anyone ever tried to stand up to them? Lisa's expression grew serious. Some have tried. Most ended up leaving the station early. But there are rumors about someone who made. The aliens back down. They call him the Reaper. Supposedly, he hunts in the lower levels of the station, taking out criminals and troublemakers. The aliens are terrified of him. Jake raised an eyebrow. Another human? That's what some people say. Others think he's just a story the aliens tell to scare each other. Either way, I've never seen him. And if he is real, he's not someone you want to meet. The stories say he's more monster than man. Lisa checked her watch. I have to go. Got a meeting with some Zephyrite traders in an hour? Word of advice, stay away from the Corvani warriors. Those are the big green-scaled ones like Vextol, but meaner. They solve most of their problems with violence, and they love picking fights with species they think are weak. After Lisa left, Jake unpacked his few belongings and tried to make the best of his small room. He had come here to help Earth establish new trade relationships, to open markets for their agricultural products and raw materials. His planet needed these deals to feed its growing population and fund its space exploration programs. He would not let a group of bullying aliens stop him from doing his job, no matter how big they were or how small they made him feel. Jake had always been small, and he had always found ways to succeed despite it. Intelligence and determination could overcome physical weakness, at least most of the time. That evening, Jake made his way to the station's main dining area. The room was enormous, filled with tables of different sizes to accommodate the various alien species. The air hummed with conversation in dozens of languages, and the smell of unfamiliar foods filled his nostrils. Jake found an empty table near the back and ordered something that looked safe from the menu. As he ate, he noticed that other diners kept glancing at him and whispering to their companions. Some pointed at him openly, while others tried to be more subtle about their staring. A group of young Corvani at a nearby table began talking louder, clearly wanting Jake to hear them. One of them, covered in scars that marked him as a warrior, kept looking at Jake and making comments that caused his friends to laugh. Though Jake could not understand their language, their tone and body language made their meaning clear. Jake finished his meal quickly and returned to his room. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. The trade negotiations were scheduled to start, and he would have his chance to prove that humans deserved respect in the galactic community. He fell asleep on the too small bed, determined to succeed despite everything working against him. Jake woke up the next morning with a sore neck from sleeping on the too small bed. He put on his best suit, the dark blue one his mother had bought him before he left Earth, and tried to look as professional as possible. Today was the first day of trade negotiations, and he could not afford to make any mistakes. The meeting room was in the center of the station, a large circular space with a high ceiling decorated with symbols from dozens of different worlds. When Jake arrived, he saw that most of the other delegates were already there. The Corvani sat at one side of the room, their green scales gleaming under the bright lights. The crystal beings called Zephyrite occupied another section, their bodies throwing rainbow patterns on the walls. The insect-like Thraktor clicked and chittered among themselves at a table near the back. Jake looked around for the human delegation area and felt his heart sink. There was a small table set up near the corner of the room, barely big enough for two people. It was clearly meant for children or unimportant guests. The main negotiation table in the center of the room had seats for all the major species, but no place for humans. Administrator Vextile entered the room and took his place at the head of the main table. He looked around the room until his eyes found Jake, then smiled in a way that showed all his sharp teeth. "Welcome, honored delegates," Vextile announced in his booming voice. "Today we begin discussions that will shape trade for the next decade. Please, all important species, take your places at the main table." The various aliens moved to their assigned seats at the central table. Jake stayed where he was, unsure of what to do. After everyone else was seated, Vextile pointed to the small table in the corner. "Human delegate," he said, his voice dripping with false politeness. "Your table is over there. We thought you would be more comfortable with furniture sized for your people." Laughter erupted from several alien delegates. The Corvani were the loudest, their deep voices echoing through the room. Some of the Thrachter pulled out small recording devices and pointed them at Jake, capturing his humiliation for their entertainment. Jake felt his face burn with embarrassment, but he walked to the small table and sat down. From there he could barely see over the heads of the other delegates to the main discussion area. It was clear that he was meant to observe, not participate. The negotiations began without him. Vextile discussed mining rights, shipping routes, and technology exchanges. Whenever someone mentioned Earth, it was only as a source of cheap food or raw materials. They talked about humans like they were discussing livestock or simple farmers, not potential partners. Jake tried to speak up several times, raising his hand and clearing his throat, but the other delegates ignored him. When he finally stood up and called out, "Excuse me," Vextile looked at him with annoyance. "Yes, human child, do you need something? Perhaps a bathroom break?" More laughter filled the room. Jake clenched his fists but kept his voice steady. "I have proposals for partnerships that could benefit everyone here. Earth has more to offer than just food and materials." "I am sure you do," Vextile said in a tone that suggested he thought the opposite. "Perhaps you can share your ideas during our break time. For now, the adults are speaking." The meeting continued for 3 hours. Jake sat at his tiny table, taking notes and growing angrier by the minute. Every proposal that could benefit Earth was dismissed without discussion. Every time he tried to contribute, he was ignored or mocked. During the lunch break, Jake stood in line at the food station behind a group of Corvani warriors. They were discussing the morning's negotiations in their own language, but Jake had studied enough to understand some of what they were saying. They were talking about him, calling him weak and pathetic. One of them said something that made the others laugh so hard they nearly dropped their food trays. Jake tried to ignore them and focus on getting his meal. He reached for a pitcher of blue liquid that looked like some kind of fruit juice. As he lifted it, his hand slipped slightly, and a few drops splashed onto the arm of the Corvani warrior in front of him. The alien spun around with a roar of anger. He was even bigger than Vextile, standing nearly 9 feet tall with muscles that bulged under his scaled skin. Scars covered his arms and face, marking him as someone who had seen many battles. His yellow eyes blazed with fury as he stared down at Jake. "You dare to touch me, weakling," the warrior bellowed. His voice was so loud that conversations throughout the dining area stopped. Everyone turned to watch what was happening. "I'm sorry," Jake said quickly. "It was an accident." "Let me clean that up for you." The warrior knocked Jake's outstretched hand away. "My name is Gorthak, and I am a warrior of the Corvani Empire. You have insulted my honor, and now you must pay the price?" Jake looked around the room and saw that every alien was watching them. Some had their recording devices out again, eager to capture whatever happened next. He could see Lisa Carter at a table across the room, her face pale with worry. "I said." "I was sorry," Jake repeated. "I didn't mean to spill anything on you." Gorthak laughed, but it was not a pleasant sound. "Sorry is not enough, little creature. In Corvani culture, when someone insults a warrior, there is only one way to restore honor. You must face me in combat." Jake felt his stomach drop. "Combat? Look, there's no need for that. It was just a few drops of juice." "Are you refusing my challenge?" Gorthek asked, his voice growing even louder. Are you admitting that humans are cowards as well as weaklings? The crowd of aliens began to murmur among themselves. Jake could hear the word coward being translated into different languages around the room. The Thraktor were clicking excitedly, and the Zephyrite chimed like broken bells. I'm not a coward, Jake said, trying to keep his voice from shaking. I just don't see why we need to fight over an accident. Vextel appeared at the edge of the crowd, pushing his way through to see what was happening. When he saw Jake facing off against Gorthek, his eyes lit up with cruel pleasure. What is the nature of this challenge? Vextel asked. This human has insulted my honor, Gorthek declared. I demand satisfaction in combat. If he refuses, let all beings know that humans are nothing but cowards who hide behind words. Vextel pretended to consider this carefully, but Jake could see that he was enjoying every moment. Gorthek is within his rights according to galactic law. Human delegate, you may accept the challenge or refuse it. However, if you refuse, I will have no choice but to ban all humans from conducting business on this station. We cannot have cowards representing their species in our negotiations. Jake looked around the room at all the watching faces. Some looked eager for a fight, others seemed bored, and a few appeared almost sympathetic. But none of them looked like they would help him. He thought about Earth, about the billions of people counting on these trade negotiations to succeed. If he refused the challenge, humans would lose access to this station and all the trade opportunities it represented. If he accepted, he would probably die. Gorthek was 3 times his size and trained for war. What are the rules? Jake asked quietly. Gorthek smiled, showing teeth like broken glass. Simple. We fight until one of us cannot continue. No weapons, no help from others. The winner lives, the loser does not. Jake swallowed hard. Around him, aliens were already placing bets on how quickly Gorthek would kill him. Some were giving him less than 30 seconds. When? Jake asked. Now, Gorthek said. In the combat arena on level 7. Unless you would prefer to run home to your little planet and tell them how you failed. Jake looked at Lisa Carter one more time. She shook her head slightly, but he could see in her eyes that she understood his position. There was no choice. I accept your challenge, Jake said. The combat arena on level 7 was a large circular room with metal walls and bright lights overhead. Jake had never seen anything like it. The floor was covered with a dark material that felt soft under his feet but looked like it had seen many battles. Dark stains marked places where blood had been spilled before. Word of the fight had spread quickly through the station. Aliens poured into the viewing galleries that surrounded the arena floor. Jake could see hundreds of faces looking down at him, most of them excited to watch what they expected to be a very short and very violent show. Gorthek entered the arena from the opposite side, and the crowd cheered. He had removed his shirt, showing muscles that looked like they had been carved from stone. His green scales gleamed under the lights, and the scars on his body told stories of many victories in combat. He rolled his massive shoulders and cracked his knuckles, each sound echoing through the arena like breaking bones. Jake stood in the center of the arena in his business suit, looking like a child who had wandered into the wrong room. He had never been in a real fight in his life. The closest he had come to violence was playing sports in college, and even then he had been more of a thinker than a fighter. Vextel's voice boomed over the arena sound system. Citizens of Nexus Prime, we are gathered to witness a challenge of honor. The human Jake Morrison has accepted combat against warrior Gorthek of the Corvani Empire. The rules are simple. The fight continues until one warrior cannot continue. The winner lives, the loser dies. The crowd roared its approval. Jake could see aliens making last-minute bets, most of them laughing as they put their money on Gorthek. In the viewing gallery, he spotted Lisa Carter watching with a worried expression. Are you ready to die, little human? Gorthek called across the arena. I will try to make it quick for you. Jake tried to think of some strategy, some way to use his size and speed against Gorthek's strength. But looking at the massive warrior, he realized there was nothing he could do. The alien was faster than he looked, stronger than Jake could imagine and trained for exactly this kind of fight. Begin! Vextel shouted. Gord HAK charged across the arena like a runaway truck. Jake dodged to the side, barely avoiding the warriors. Outstretched claws. Gorthik spun around and swung again, his massive fist whistling through the air where Jake's head had been a moment before. The crowd cheered every time Gorthik came close to hitting Jake. They booed when Jake managed to dodge or duck away from an attack. It was clear who they wanted to win. Jake kept running and dodging, but he was already getting tired. Gorthik seemed to have endless energy, and each attack came closer than the last. After 5 minutes of this deadly game, Jake's suit was torn and dirty, and sweat poured down his face. "Stop running, coward," Gorthik roared. "Face me like a warrior." Jake knew he could not run forever. His legs were starting to shake, and his breathing was getting heavy. Gorthik was barely even breathing hard. The next time the warrior charged, Jake tried to stand his ground and fight back. It was a mistake. Gorthik's fist caught Jake in the stomach, lifting him off his feet and sending him flying across the arena. Jake hit the wall hard and slid to the floor, gasping for air. Pain shot through his ribs, and he tasted blood in his mouth. The crowd went wild. They thought the fight was over. Gorthik raised his arms in victory and walked slowly toward Jake, ready to finish him off. That was when the lights began to flicker. At first, nobody paid attention. Station lights sometimes had problems, and it was not unusual for them to dim or flash. But then the flickering became more violent, and the lights began to go out in sections. Darkness crept across the arena like a living thing. The crowd's cheering faded to nervous murmurs. Even Gorthik stopped his victory walk and looked up at the failing lights with confusion. Then the temperature began to drop. It started slowly, just a slight chill in the air that made some aliens shiver. But within seconds, the cold became bitter and harsh. Jake could see his breath forming clouds in front of his face. Frost began to appear on the metal walls of the arena. An emergency alarm started blaring throughout the station. The sound was loud and urgent, the kind of warning that meant something very dangerous was happening. Red lights flashed in the corridors outside the arena, and Jake could hear running footsteps as station security rushed to respond to whatever was going wrong. But the most frightening thing was not the cold, or the alarms, or the failing lights. It was the shadow that passed by the viewing windows. Something massive moved past the arena's outer wall, blocking out the stars beyond. The shadow was huge, bigger than any ship Jake had ever seen, and it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The very air around it seemed to bend and twist, as if reality itself was being warped by whatever was out there. The crowd of aliens had gone completely silent now. Even the bravest Korvani warriors were backing away from the windows, their faces pale with terror. Some of the smaller species had already fled from the viewing galleries, pushing and shoving in their panic to escape. Gorthik stood frozen in the middle of the arena, his victory forgotten. His yellow eyes were wide with fear, and for the first time since Jake had met him, the mighty warrior looked small and helpless. Then came the voice. It started as a low rumble that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The sound vibrated through the metal walls and floor, making Jake's bones ache. It was deep and powerful, like the growl of some enormous predator that had been sleeping for 1,000 years and had just woken up hungry. The voice spoke in perfect galactic standard, the common language that all species used for trade and diplomacy. But there was something wrong with the way it sounded, something that made every alien in the arena want to run and hide. "I smell fear," the voice said, each word rolling through the station like thunder. "I smell prey, and I smell someone threatening. My family." Jake struggled to his feet, ignoring the pain in his ribs. He had never heard that voice before, but something about it seemed familiar. There was an accent underneath the alien words, something that reminded him of home. The arena's main entrance doors burst open with a sound like breaking metal. Whatever had opened them had not bothered to use the controls. The thick steel doors had simply been torn apart like paper. Through the destroyed entrance came darkness itself. The creature that entered the arena was like nothing Jake had ever imagined. It stood nearly 10 feet tall, but its exact shape was hard to see because shadows seemed to move around it like living things. Its eyes burned red in the darkness. 2 points of light that seemed to see everything and judge it all as wanting. When it moved, reality bent around it. The air shimmered, colors shifted, and Jake felt like he was looking at something that should not exist in the normal world. This was a nightmare made real, a monster from the darkest dreams of every species in the galaxy. The aliens in the viewing galleries screamed and ran. Even the bravest warriors trampled each other in their desperate flight from the arena. Within seconds, Jake, Gorthuk, and the dark creature were alone. Gorthuk tried to run too, but his legs would not obey him. He stood shaking in the middle of the arena, unable to move, barely able to breathe. His warrior training meant nothing. In the face of this terror, the creature's burning eyes fixed on Gorthuk, and when it spoke again, its voice was filled with cold anger. "You hurt my brother?" Jake stared at the dark creature in shock. The word brother echoed in his mind, but it seemed impossible. This monster, this nightmare that had the entire station running in terror, could not be related to him. Jake was human, normal, ordinary. This thing was something else entirely, but as Jake looked closer at the burning red eyes, something familiar looked back at him. Behind the darkness and the terror, behind the shadows that moved like living things, he saw something he recognized. The shape of the face, the way the creature held its head, the protective stance it took when looking at him. "Ryan?" Jake whispered. The creature's terrible form seemed to flicker for a moment. The shadows pulled back slightly and Jake could see more of the face underneath. It was older, changed by whatever had been done to it, but it was definitely his brother, Ryan Hayes, who had left Earth 3 years ago to join a special military program. Ryan, who had sent letters for the first year and then gone silent. Ryan, who their parents thought was dead. "Hello, little brother," the creature said, and now Jake could hear his brother's voice underneath the terrifying growl. "Are you hurt?" Jake touched his ribs where Gorthuk had him. They were sore, probably bruised, but nothing was broken. "I'm okay," he said. "But Ryan, what happened to you? What did they do to you?" The creature that was Ryan turned its burning gaze toward Gorthuk, who was still frozen with fear in the middle of the arena. "We can talk later. First, I need to deal with the alien that hurt my family." Gorthuk finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a squeak. "Please," he begged. "I was only following our customs." It was an honorable challenge. "I meant no real harm." Ryan moved toward Gorthuk with slow, deliberate steps. Each footfall made the metal floor ring like a bell. The shadows around him seemed to reach out toward the terrified warrior, and the temperature in the arena dropped even further. "Honorable?" Ryan's voice was like ice breaking on a frozen lake. "You were going to kill my brother over spilled juice. You humiliated him in front of hundreds of beings. You made him feel small and weak and afraid. Where is the honor in that?" Gorthuk fell to his knees, his massive frame shaking like a leaf in a storm. "I did not know," he stammered. "I did not know he was protected. I did not know he had family." "Here, every human has family," Ryan said. "Every human has someone who cares about them, someone who will come for them if they are threatened. You should have remembered that before you decided to play your little games." Jake stepped forward, still hurting but determined to understand what was happening. "Ryan, you've been here all along? You've been watching me?" Ryan turned back too. His brother, and his voice became gentle again. The contrast between the way he spoke to Jake and the way he had addressed Gorthuk was startling. "I've been in the lower levels of the station for 2 years now. I heard you were coming, so I stayed. Close to make sure you were safe." "But what are you?" Jake asked. "What did they do to you in that military program?" Ryan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, there was sadness in his voice that cut through the frightening growl. They needed soldiers who could survive in places where normal humans could. Not go, deep space, alien worlds, the dark places between stars. So they changed us. They made us into something new, something that could hunt and fight and protect in environments that would kill anyone else. Jake looked at his brother's changed form, at the shadows that moved around him like pets, at the red eyes that burned. In the darkness, "Are you still human?" "I don't know," Ryan admitted. "I remember being human. I remember our family, our home, the way Mom used to make pancakes on Sunday mornings. But I also remember things that humans should not know, and I can do things that humans cannot do. I exist in the spaces between normal and nightmare." Throughout their conversation, more aliens had begun to gather in the corridors outside the arena, but none of them dared to enter. Jake could see faces pressed against the windows, watching from what they hoped was a safe distance. He recognized Vextal among them, the proud administrator now cowering behind a support beam. "The aliens here call you the Reaper," Jake said. Ryan made a sound that might have been laughter, but it sent chills down Jake's spine. "They gave me that name after I started cleaning up their criminal problems. This station was full of smugglers, slave traders, and murderers when I arrived. The legitimate authorities could not or would not deal with them, so I did." "You killed them?" "Only the ones who would not listen to reason. Most of them were smart enough to leave the station once they realized I was hunting them. The rest learned that there are some lines you do not cross, some people you do not hurt." Gorthik was still on his knees, but he had stopped shaking quite so badly. "What do you want from me?" he asked. Ryan considered the question carefully. "I want you to understand something important. Every human who comes to this station is under my protection. Every human trader, diplomat, tourist, or worker is part of my family. If you hurt them, if you threaten them, if you even make them feel unwelcome, I will know about it." "And if we do hurt them?" Gorthik asked, though he seemed afraid to hear the answer. "Then you will discover why the criminals no longer operate in this sector of space," Ryan said simply. Word of what was happening in the arena had spread throughout the station. Jake could see that the corridors were packed with aliens now, all of them trying to get a look at the legendary Reaper, while staying far enough away to avoid his attention. Vextal finally worked up the courage to speak, shouting from the safety of the corridor, "Reaper, this was a legal challenge under galactic law. The human accepted it willingly." Ryan turned his terrible gaze toward the administrator, and Vextal immediately ducked back behind his support beam. "The human accepted it because you gave him no choice. You told him that all humans would be banned from the station if he refused. That is not a willing choice. That is coercion." "The law is the law," Vextal called out, though his voice was shaking. "Your law," Ryan replied. "Human law is different. Human law says that family protects family no matter what. Human law says that we stand together against those who would harm us. Human law says that if you threaten one of us, you threaten all of us." Jake looked around the arena at all the watching faces. For the first time since he had arrived at the station, he saw something other than mockery or dismissal in their eyes. Now he saw fear, yes, but also respect. And underneath both of those emotions, he saw the beginning of understanding. "I don't need you to fight my battles for me," Jake told his brother quietly, Ryan's burning eyes focused on him with surprising gentleness. "I know you don't, little brother. You're stronger than they realize, smarter than they give you credit for. But that doesn't mean you have to face everything alone. Family stands together, remember?" Jake nodded, feeling tears prick at his eyes. He had thought he was completely alone on this station, surrounded by aliens who saw him as nothing more than an amusing pet. But he had not been alone at all. His brother had been watching, protecting, making sure that no real harm came to him. "What happens now?" Jake asked. Ryan looked at Gorthik, who was still kneeling in the center of the arena. "Now the warrior apologizes to my brother and withdraws his challenge. And then everyone goes back to treating humans with the respect they deserve." Gorthik nodded quickly. "I withdraw my challenge," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I apologize for my disrespect. I was wrong to underestimate the human's true strength." Ryan smiled, and even though his face was changed and frightening, Jake could still see his big brother in that expression. "Good," Ryan said. "I'm glad we understand each other." The arena fell silent after Gorthik's apology. Ryan stood in the center of the space, his dark form still radiating power and menace. but Jake could see that his brother was holding back. The shadows around Ryan seemed calmer now, and the terrible cold was starting to fade from the air. Gorthik slowly got to his feet, his massive frame still shaking slightly. The proud warrior who had seemed so confident and dangerous just minutes before now looked like a frightened child. He bowed deeply to Jake, something that would have been unthinkable an hour ago. "I was wrong about humans," Gorthik said, his voice carrying clearly through the arena. "I thought size was the only measure of strength. I thought that because you were small, you were weak. I did not understand that your true power came from somewhere else." Jake looked at his brother, then back at Gorthik. "What do you understand now?" "I understand that humans have something we Corvani have forgotten," Gorthik replied. "We fight alone, each warrior proving his own strength. But humans fight together. They protect each other. They are stronger as a group than any of us could ever be alone." From the corridors came the sound of many footsteps. Jake turned to see Vextel approaching the arena entrance, but the administrator was no longer walking with his usual arrogant swagger. He moved carefully, respectfully, like someone approaching a dangerous animal that might attack at any moment. "Honored human delegate," Vextel called out, his voice much more polite than it had ever been before. "Perhaps we should continue our trade negotiations. I believe there may have been some misunderstandings about your people's capabilities." Jake almost laughed at the sudden change in Vextel's attitude. The same alien who had stuck him at a children's table and mocked him all morning was now calling him honored delegate and admitting to misunderstandings. "I think that would be a good idea," Jake replied. "But this time I want a proper seat at the main table. And I want the other delegates to actually listen to what Earth has to offer." Of course," Vextel said quickly. "Whatever you require. Perhaps you would also like better quarters? The diplomatic suite on level 12 is available, with a view of the nebula and all the amenities." Jake looked around the arena, at all the alien faces watching him from the corridors and galleries. Word of what had happened here would spread through the station within hours. By tomorrow, every being on Nexus Prime would know that humans were not the weak, helpless creatures they had appeared to be. "Ryan," Jake said quietly to his brother, "you don't have to stay here for me. I can handle things from now on." Ryan's burning red eyes focused on him with something that might have been pride. "I know you can, little brother. You were handling things pretty well even before I showed up. But I think I'll stick around for a few more days, just to make sure everyone remembers this lesson." Over the next week, Jake's experience on Nexus Prime changed completely. Instead of mockery and dismissal, he found himself treated with careful respect by every alien he met. When he walked through the station corridors, conversations stopped and beings stepped aside to let him pass. The same aliens who had been laughing at him now nodded politely and spoke to him in hushed, respectful tones. The trade negotiations resumed the next day, and this time Jake sat at the head of the main table. Every proposal he made was listened to carefully. Every idea he suggested was given serious consideration. The agreements that Earth had been hoping for suddenly became not just possible, but easy to arrange. Lisa Carter found Jake in his new diplomatic suite on the evening of the third day. She looked around the luxurious rooms with amazement, taking in the expensive furniture and the incredible view of space beyond the station. "Well," she said with a grin, "I have to say this is a lot better than that closet they had you in before." Jake was sitting by the large window, looking out at the stars. "It's funny how quickly things can change," he said. 3 days ago, these same aliens thought I was a joke. Now they hang on every word I say." "Fear has a way of making people more polite," Lisa observed. "But is that really how you want them to treat you? Out of fear instead of respect?" Jake considered her question carefully. "I've been thinking about that. At first, I was just grateful that they were finally listening to me. But you're right, fear isn't the same as respect. I don't want them to be nice to me just because they're scared of my brother. So what are you going to do about it?" Jake stood up and moved away from the window. "I'm going to prove that I deserve their respect for my own reasons, not just because of who my family is." The next morning, Jake called for a special session of the trade negotiations. When all the delegates had gathered in the meeting room, he stood up at the head of the table and looked around at their faces. He could see nervousness in their expressions, uncertainty about what the human might want from them. "I want to talk about fear," Jake began. "For the past few days you have all been very polite to me. You have listened to my proposals and agreed to my terms. But I know that most of you are doing this because you are afraid of what might happen if you don't." The alien delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some of them glanced toward the doors, as if expecting the Reaper to appear at any moment. "I don't want your fear," Jake continued. "I want your partnership. I want you to work with Earth because we have something valuable to offer, not because you're scared of the consequences if you don't." Gorthik, who had been attending the negotiations as an observer since their confrontation, spoke up. "But human delegate, how can we forget what we have seen? How can we ignore the power that stands behind you?" "You shouldn't forget it," Jake replied. "But you should understand what it really means. My brother doesn't represent some threat that Earth is making against you. He represents the lengths that humans will go to in order to protect each other. He shows you that we are a people who value loyalty, family, and standing together against those who would harm us." Jake walked around the table as he spoke, making eye contact with each delegate. "Every species here has some kind of strength. The Corvani are mighty warriors. The Zephyrite have incredible technology. The Thraktor are master engineers. Earth's strength is different, but just as real. Our strength is that we never abandon each other." Vextel leaned forward in his chair. "What are you proposing, human delegate?" "I'm proposing that we build real partnerships based on mutual benefit, not fear. Earth has resources, knowledge, and skills that you need. You have things that we need. We can all benefit from working together, but only if we do it as equals." Jake returned to his seat and pulled out a datapad containing his prepared proposals. "I have drawn up new trade agreements that are fair to everyone involved. No one gets everything they want, but everyone gets something valuable. We share our agricultural techniques, you share your transportation technology. We provide raw materials, you provide manufacturing capabilities." The delegates looked at each other uncertainly. This was not what they had expected. They had been prepared to give the human whatever he wanted, just to avoid angering the terrible creature that protected him. "You would really negotiate fairly with us?" asked one of the Zephyrite delegates, her crystalline voice ringing like bells. "Even though you have the power to simply take what you want," Jake smiled. "That's exactly the point. Having power and using it wisely are two different things. Earth doesn't want to rule over other species or force them to do what we want. We want to be part of the galactic community as partners and friends." The negotiations that followed were the most productive that Nexus Prime had ever seen. Without fear driving the discussions, the alien delegates were free to propose creative solutions and mutually beneficial arrangements. By the end of the week, Jake had secured trade agreements that were better than anything Earth had dared to hope for. On his last night at the station, Jake sat with Ryan in the observation deck, looking out at the stars. His brother's appearance had changed again. The shadows were still there, and his eyes still glowed with that unsettling red light. But he seemed more human now, more like the brother Jake remembered. "I'm proud of you," Ryan said quietly. "You could have used fear to get whatever you wanted, but you chose a harder path. You chose to earn their respect instead of demanding it." "I learned from the best," Jake replied. "You could have killed Gorthik and terrorized the whole station into submission, but you held back. You showed them your strength and then chose mercy. That's what made them really listen to me." Ryan smiled, and for a moment he looked almost like his old self. "Mom and Dad are going to be so proud when they hear about this. Their little diplomat son, changing the Galaxy 1 trade agreement at a time. Will you come home with me?" Jake asked. "They miss you. We all do." Ryan was quiet for a long moment. "Someday," he said finally, "when my work here is done. But for now, this is where I need to be. The galaxy is a big place, and there are a lot of humans out there who might need protection. Jake nodded, understanding. He looked out at the vast expanse of space, thinking about all the worlds and stations and ships where humans were probably facing the same kind of prejudice and dismissal he had encountered, but now he knew they weren't really alone. Somewhere in the darkness, their guardians were watching. The next morning, Jake boarded the transport that would take him back to Earth.